There are lots of good reasons to go with Sega Saturn instead of Pretendo. We call them games. Sega Saturn has tons of them. Pretendo has just a few. It does beg the question, do you want to play or twiddle your thumbs? Face it, Pretendo, you weren't worth waiting for.
Hey there, Retro Games fans, this is Andy C from Piece of 8-Bit. Well, the time has arrived. It is the end of the month, which can only mean one thing. It is time to review our month with console, which this month has been the Sega Saturn. Before we dive into that, a couple of quick announcements that I just wanted to make regarding the channel. So, first announcement, you'll be pleased to notice that my one attempt at wearing a hat on the video with my logo on it, that's ended. So, James at Retro Import Gamer, if you're watching, your trademark hat approach is safe. I won't be wearing a cap anymore. I looked ridiculous. So that's the first and most important announcement, of course. Secondly, my life circumstances have changed a little bit in the last sort of couple of weeks, and so as a result, I'm going to be making a few less videos than I have been doing. There's two reasons for that. One is that I just don't have the time, and two is that I'm going to be doing I'm running a different channel, which if you're into software development and all that sort of thing, go check it out. It's called the Agile Arcade, but it's probably not going to be that relevant to most of you watching this channel, but if it is, please go check it out. So I couldn't do that and do the bit between and do the Monday Minute and do my Friday video all at the same time. It's just not enough hours in the day to film those and get those edited. So my plan is to continue to do Friday videos, and then occasionally I will do a bit between on a Wednesday, and then if I'm feeling in the mood, I may do a Monday Minute. But the Friday videos will be the thing that I'll always do. So enough of that. That's all the announcements. I mentioned before that this month I have been living with the Sega Saturn. Some might call this Sega's ill-fated console. We'll get into all of that as we go through the video, but I'm going to be talking to you today a bit around the history of the development of this unit and how it came to be, and it's a bit of a woeful tale, and we've touched on some of that throughout the month already, and I'll recover some of that. We'll be having a look at some of the hardware specs and how it compares, probably just to the PlayStation. I'm not really going to compare it to the N64. This and the PlayStation were sort of bitter rivals, launched within a week of each other. So we're just going to be comparing that to the PlayStation. We have done it before, so when we did the PlayStation and the N64, we also had a look at the hardware specs as well there. So we'll probably skirt through that fairly quick, and obviously you can go and see some of the other consoles from this generation in my other month widths that I've done over the last sort of year or so. We'll also be then looking at some of the games that I've been playing, and also how you can get yourself back into Sega Saturn gaming in 2026 if that's something you're interested in. And then I'll tell you what it's been like. And of course, at the very end, I'll reveal to you what the next console is going to be for next month. And as always, I'm fairly excited for this one. And yeah, well, I won't give anything away. You have to stay tuned for that, or you could just skip through the chapters and go to the end and find out if you really want to. But what's the fun in that? Plus, I'll be sad. I'll know. I won't know, but I might know. So there you go. Right, that's it then. That's the intro done. So let's now dive right into the history of the Sega Saturn and how it came to be. And I'll see you in there. So before we dive into the games, before we talk about the specs, before we get nostalgic about arcade perfection, let's talk about how the Sega Saturn even came to be, because it didn't arrive in a vacuum. By the early 1990s, Sega were really flying high. The Mega Drive or the Genesis had gone toe-to-toe with Nintendo, and in some territories, especially the US, it had genuinely won market share. Sonic, of course, was a cultural icon by this point. Arcades were still super strong, and Sega had swagger. But underneath that confidence, there were cracks forming. So anyway, the Saturn, it began development around 92, 93, and originally it was designed as a powerful 2D machine, and therein lies the problem. That is important, because at that point, Sega still believed that sprite scaling, arcade-style visuals, fast 2D gameplay were the future. And then something changed. Sony entered the picture, and Sony's PlayStation was built from the ground up, and it was built for 3D polygon gaming first and foremost, and Sega panicked. So late into the development, Sega added a second CPU to the Saturn to boost 3D performance, which on paper was pretty impressive. In reality, incredibly complex. And what we ended up with was this dual Hitachi SH2 processor setup, which we'll talk about in the next section, multiple video display processors, separate sound hardware, shared memory quirks. It became very powerful, but notoriously difficult to develop for. And that decision, that last-minute hardware adjustment, would define the console's life and Sega's life from that point onwards. It launched in Japan in 1994, and it did reasonably well early on, but the real drama was happening in North America. At E3 in 1995, Sega announced the Saturn would launch immediately. So not in a few months, not later that year, immediately. Retailers were just floored. Developers were shocked. Even some of Sega's own partners were like, what the hell's going on here? And to make things worse, the launch price was $399. Then Sony, of course, famously stepped onto the stage, ultimate mic drop moment, and said the words $299 and walked off stage. And that was the PlayStation price. That single moment is still talked about today. I've talked about it before, and it meant that the Saturn was then $100 more expensive, at the same time as being harder to develop for, and competing with a simpler, cheaper, more 3D focused machine. It was absolutely brutal. It was a huge blow to Sega. But initially the Saturn had strong sales of software in Japan, and arcade conversions like Virtua Fighter were huge. But in the West, momentum was really starting to fade, and by the late 90s, global sales landed around the 9 to 10 million units worldwide. Compare that to the PlayStation's eventual pushing 100 million, that gap is enormous, and the damage wasn't just numbers. Retailers, who were already pretty rocked, lost confidence. Developers found the Saturn architecture more and increasingly frustrating. Consumers are already confused, but especially after the Sega CD and the 32X of the 16-bit era. So Sega didn't really need a good console, they needed clarity, and instead what they delivered was confusion and complexity. Now, here's the interesting thing, here's the key thing here. The Saturn itself wasn't really weak. In many ways, it was incredibly capable. It could push these beautiful 2D visuals around, it handled arcade ports absolutely brilliantly, and it had really strong sound hardware. But the architecture was just too difficult, and developers had to carefully split tasks across processors, optimizing for the Saturn time and required time, skill and patience optimizing for it. So the PlayStation was comparatively straightforward. It had one CPU, a cleaner 3D pipeline, and much easier development tools. And developers ultimately just followed the simplicity, and especially when the cheapest console was also selling faster. So the third-party support really began to shift, and once that happens, it's like a snowball, and it's very, very hard to reverse. Sad times, really. But this is where things get really interesting, because the Saturn's failure ultimately didn't hurt just one generation. It fundamentally weakened Sega as a hardware manufacturer. And internally, of course, it's well known that the tensions between Japan and America and Sega, and they just got worse. Strategic confidence just completely bottomed out. Financial losses just mounted. And the Dreamcast, sadly, which followed in 1998, was absolutely brilliant. It was innovative, it was online focused, it was forward thinking. I love it. I think it's a great machine. But it launched into a market where Sega's credibility had already been totally wiped out. Retailers were obviously very cautious now. Consumers were cautious. Investors were cautious. Everyone was a bit unsure. And it didn't just single-handedly end the Saturn. It ended Sega's presence as a console manufacturer. So it ultimately then struggled against the PS2, and the rest is history. So in 2001, as we know, Sega then exited the console market entirely, which means this console, the Saturn, represents that defining moment when Sega's dominance began to wane. And yet, the Saturn is far from a failure in spirit. It's one of the most fascinating consoles ever made. It's massively over-engineered, it's very bold, it's technically ambitious, utterly chaotic, and it represents Sega at its most experimental, and you can see that in the games of that era. But it also represented Sega at its most divided. It's a console that shows what happens when vision, ego, innovation and panic collide, and in many ways it's why it's so interesting to revisit today as a bit of a case study, because the Saturn isn't just a console, it is a historical turning point. So now that we understand how the Saturn came to be, let's take a look at what it actually was like under the hood, because for all its chaos, there was a lot of chaos. The hardware was anything but boring. So let's go and take a look. Right, well, let's talk about hardware now then. So for those of you who watch my channel and you catch up with the month with, you'll know that I have my iPad here with all my specs on it. So I'll just run through the specs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the PlayStation with the Saturn. So obviously the N64 was also in that generation as well. A very different console. If you're interested in the specifications for that, go and check out the month with the N64, which was a few months back, not that long ago, where we look at the specs of that. And that is very interesting as well, but quite a different architecture and came a little bit later into that generation. The Saturn and the PlayStation, really, they were the rivals. So that's what we're going to cover off today. So let's dive in, as we always do, with the CPU. So on paper, they're not too different, because on the PlayStation we've got the MIPS R3000A, which runs at 33.8 megahertz, and on the Sega Saturn we've got the slower Hitachi SH2, which is running at 28.6 megahertz. But of course, on the Sega Saturn, as I mentioned before, there are two of those. So we've got a dual core, a dual CPU architecture, which is pretty unheard of for that era, to be honest with you. Unfortunately, of course, the other issue with that is that we didn't really know how to make best use of that, and it wasn't particularly well optimized for architecture. So literally Sega panicked when they saw the PlayStation specs and went, let's just shove another processor in there. That's certainly how it felt, which made it very, very difficult for engineers, software engineers, to figure out how to make best use of that. So more powerful on paper, because we had two CPUs, but not necessarily, well, definitely not easier to program for. And it's not like Sony are always great at this either, because the PlayStation 3 notoriously was very, very difficult to develop for on the cell architecture. So Sony are not blameless. They've made that mistake as well. So maybe it's easy done. Main RAM, exactly the same on both, 2 megabytes on both. Video RAM, slightly better on the Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn had 1.5 megabytes split across VDPs. So again, something that was really complicated to optimize for. The PlayStation 1, the original PlayStation, had less memory video RAM at 1 megabyte, but it was much easier to make use of. Sound RAM, 512K, not very interesting there on both. Now, in terms of graphics, I've got a category here called graphics strength, because I think this is quite important, and this is really was a defining difference between the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation. And the graphics strength, if you like, on the Sega Saturn was it was all about excellent 2D sprites and scaling, and that is fantastic for the arcade ports. And if you were looking for your Sega arcade ports, apart from the fact you wouldn't get them on the PlayStation to start with anyway, but if you were looking for those ports, the Saturn was just brilliant. It would just lap that up. And if you look at something like Sega Rally, for instance, it's a fantastic port from the arcade. But where the PlayStation was so much better was in its ability to do 3D polygons, 3D polygon rendering, and it really was a trailblazer for 3D gaming. Of course, we saw the N64 about a year later, which kind of, again, you know, when we saw Mario 64, was just absolutely incredible when it comes to 3D rendering for that era. But the PlayStation, that was where it was at in 1995. In terms of polygons per second, and you can see the difference here. So there was a theoretical of 200,000 polygons per second on the Sega Saturn, compared to 360,000 on the PlayStation, and that is where you're really seeing that big difference with the ability to shift 3D polygons around in those two machines. Storage, obviously, both were running CD-ROMs, and I think, you know, where Sony beat Nintendo and they beat Sega was that Sony had the simplest of the hardware, but it also had CD, and Nintendo 64. A lot of people reckon that the biggest problem with the N64 was really because of the cartridges. They were very expensive and obviously proprietary technology. So Sony kind of had the best of both worlds. It had the ability to do CD based gaming, and it had a good simple architecture. So the Sega Saturn was too complex, had CD, great. Complexity, not so good. N64, good architecture, annoying storage. So Sony kind of got it right there, which is why they won, and you know, the rest is history. And then of course, finally, not really a hardware thing, but something to point out that I've already pointed out, which is that the launch price of the Sega Saturn was $399 versus $299 for the PlayStation 1. And that again, that's a big difference. You know, as I said before already, you've got a simpler, more accessible machine that's $100 less. What are you going to go for? Well, we all know the answer to that. So there you go, that's the hardware. So it is quite interesting. It's a powerful machine. On paper, when you look at it, that dual Hitachi SH2 architecture that you got, that's incredible. For the mid-90s, dual CPU, amazing. Nobody could use it. So it is an incredibly ambitious machine, fantastic, but it counts for nothing if you can't program for it. And as I mentioned, you know, Sony did it with the PS3. They brought the cell processor out, an incredible piece of equipment that could be, you could have them in parallel and all those kind of things, but it was so hard to build for, and it meant that the PS3 was a real change in terms of, you know, we'd had the PS2, which was the most successful console of all time, to the PS3, which really struggled in the early days, and Microsoft almost beat it with the 360. It was a very, very close run thing. So yeah, it doesn't always pay to be the most complex and the most powerful on paper, because sometimes that doesn't count for much, especially if you can't program for it. So there you go. That is the hardware. So let's talk now about some of the games that I've been playing through the last month. So I will see you in there. Right, here it comes. You know it. You know I'm going to say it. The games make the console. Is it true? Is it true for the Sega Saturn that the games make the console? Yeah, it is. It is true. It is true, because the games, albeit there are not many, are pretty good for the most part. There are some duff games on there, but there's duff games on every console, right? But there are some absolute gems on here. So I'm going to just talk through what I played. Now you can see I've got a big pile of stuff behind me here, because I played quite a lot. I got to the end of the month and I thought, do you know what? I've not really played much on the Saturn. And then I thought, actually, do you know what? When I actually thought about all the games that I played, it was actually quite a lot. So, well, we'll start with, I don't know where the box is for it. We'll start with Nights into Dreams, which was last week's The Bit Between. So we had a good go of that, and that was a fantastic game. And that was really an example of what I was talking about with Sega being in their experimental era. That is a great game, and it is a great game in terms of that experimental piece. It is just loads and loads of fun. I really, really enjoyed playing Nights into Dreams, even though in the demo, the playthrough that I did with you on Wednesday was pretty terrible. It was pretty dire, and I can only apologise for that. And then of course another game which also very experimental and also fantastic and looks beautiful and sounds amazing was Panzer Dragoon. And again, I really enjoyed playing that game, loved that, and it was a real showcase. It was a game I'd never really played before. I'm super excited to go and have a play of the modern version of it, and it is just a stunning game, really imaginative, really innovative, and I wish we saw more games like that with that kind of level of innovation nowadays as well. But what were some of the others that I played? Well, also on The Bit Between, we covered these two absolute behemoths. So we played Sega Rally, which is one of my absolute favourite racing games of all time. It's a must play in the arcade. I absolutely adore this game. It is fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it, and the port is pretty excellent, to be honest with you. It's the best place to play Sega Rally on a console. There are good versions of Sega Rally later on after the fact, you know, most notably, and it was mentioned the other day by Retro Import Gamer, in fact, actually, which is Sega Rally on the PlayStation 2, which is fantastic. But this is the closest thing you'll get to playing the arcade version. It is absolutely brilliant. I absolutely adore Sega Rally on both the Dreamcast on the Saturn, but also in the arcade as well. And then of course following up that is the super fantastically fun Daytona USA. which is another game that I absolutely love in the arcades. It's fantastic, and it's so much fun to play, and it is a good port on the Saturn. I do enjoy playing it on the Saturn, but it was a little bit rushed, and it was early in the cycle, so there was a few issues with it, but it really does capture the spirit of the original Daytona game in the arcade, which is absolutely fantastic. There were some other races as well that I had to go with. Obviously the notorious Wipeout, which is a real Marmite game, which people either love it or they hate it. I absolutely love Wipeout, but it is a very divisive game. It's supposed to be a bit better on the Saturn, but to be honest with you, I didn't really notice much of a difference. I think it's just as good on the PlayStation as it is on the Saturn, and of course it's for some reason more synonymous with the PlayStation. I think because later on, obviously Psygnosis became part of Sony, and so we started to only see Wipeout on the Sony platforms. But Wipeout is really, really good on the Sega Saturn. Also played, where is it? Also played a bit of, I can't find the box, it's here somewhere. Oh, well, I'll be fine. There wasn't the box I was looking for, but I'll go for this one. Played a bit of Road Rash, an Electronic Arts game. Fantastic game again. Also really like this version of it. I prefer the original Road Rash, but I quite like this version as well on a lot of platforms. So you can play this on all sorts. You can play this on the PlayStation. You can even play it on the 3DO. But it is a great fun game. It is good rushing through the streets at breakneck speed and then launching yourself off and having to run back and get your bike is just great fun. Let's see if I can find the one I was looking for. Here we go. And also a bit of Destruction Derby. Again, a game which is very synonymous with the original PlayStation. So another game that I played a little bit of as well. And again, no real difference, I think, between the Destruction Derby on the Sega Saturn versus the Destruction Derby on the PlayStation as well. Forget which consoles I was talking about then for a minute. So yeah, Destruction Derby, really, really good fun. Again, quite a Marmite game actually. Not everybody loves that game, but I've got lots of fond memories of it. I used to play it on the PC actually, not even on the console. Obviously, also on the bit between, we looked at the Die Hard trilogy. I had no idea just how much love there was for this game. I'd never really played it before, and I never played it on the PlayStation because I didn't own a PlayStation until quite late in the cycle. And I never played it on the Saturn because I didn't know anyone who owned a Saturn. The PlayStation version is definitely better. I think that much is clear. If you do a side-by-side comparison, graphically it's a bit better, the gameplay is a little bit better, it's a bit smoother. But this is a good version. It's a good, complete version of the Die Hard trilogy, and it is still enjoyable to play, and I enjoyed doing it on the bit between. I kind of wished in some ways that I'd played the PlayStation 1 back when I did the PlayStation month with. But yeah, really enjoyed Die Hard trilogy, and you're basically getting 3 games for once. The nice thing about buying this was you could pick up 3 games and get for the price of 1 and have 3 completely different little sort of games within it. So really, really good game. Like I said, I had no idea how much love there was for it. It's one of the most popular bit betweens I think I've ever done. So lots and lots of love, loads of comments on that one. Some other random games that I played. So I played a bit of Command and Conquer. So, you know, that's a staple on a lot of platforms. Really, really good game. I actually got a little bit further on Command and Conquer on the Saturn than I've ever managed to get anywhere before. So played that actually for quite a while. I kind of got a bit addicted to that for a short time. But time is something I don't have lots of, so it wasn't for all that long. Played a bit of Lost World. Jurassic Park. No, I didn't love this game. I'll be honest with you, I didn't love that game. But yeah, I had a bit of a go at that. Got bored of that quite quickly. Obviously the Virtua Fighters 1 and 2, great entries in the fighter series. Played those a bit, 2-player, fantastic fun. The kids thought they were hilarious, especially when you play the old guy. I can't remember his name. It's like watching Santa in a fight. It was quite amusing. But yeah, I really enjoy the Virtua Fighter games. They're great fighting games. You know, they definitely stand up to the likes of Tekken and all of those, you know, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, all of those kind of things. I think Virtua Fighter deserved its place in some of the top fighting games that you can get as well. So yes, Virtua Fighter 2. Played a bit of Digital Pinball, which is a game that I just happened to have. That's actually really good. I played this for ages. It's actually really, really good. I really liked it. And I know pinball's a bit of a waste of a console, some people might argue, but I actually really quite like it. I've got a digital pinball game for a lot of platforms actually, but it's actually really good. If you get yourself a Saturn, then go check it out, because it's actually quite cool. But yeah, quite like that for no good reason. Oh, then I played a game that I remember from the 90s. Now, I played this on the PC. This is Magic Carpet. I played it on the PC, and I seem to remember it being better. I played it on the Saturn, and I could not figure out for the life of me what was going on. The control scheme was horrific. I couldn't get the hang of it. It was all over the place. Absolute nightmare. I imagine at the time, well, I remember at the time it's looking really cool. I used to think this game looked really, really cool. But yeah, could not get on with that game at all. So I think that's probably just aged badly. I don't think it's necessarily a bad game. I think maybe it's just aged a bit badly. It just didn't play very well. Certainly not on the Saturn. Maybe I need to go and check out the PC version that I played years and years and years ago. I think it was on the PC at least anyway, and see if that was any better. And then the last two, so Alien Trilogy, played this one a lot. I nearly did this as a bit between. I played this quite a lot actually, and got quite far into it, got reasonably far into it. It got a little bit samey, but I actually really like it. It's quite good, and it gives you some good jump scares. For a game of its age, it gives you some pretty good jump scares. So really, really enjoyed playing that. For a good few hours I played on that one. Didn't have time to get too much further into it than that, but really enjoyed that, and that's a game I feel like I could go back and play some more. Looks really good as well. Looks pretty good. Nice and atmospheric. And then finally, well, what generation would be complete without a golf game? So I played the Pebble Beach Golf Links game, and do you know what? It's actually pretty good for a golf game. It's really not that bad at all. Yeah, it's got a little bit of sort of motion video, what do you call it, FMV, full motion video capture sort of thing, you know, and the little players are sort of like little video animations rather than graphic animations, or it certainly seems to be anyway. So it's quite fun. It's actually not a bad looking game, and it's quite playable. Very samey, like a lot of those sort of golf games. It's actually a Sega game as well. It's actually a Sega sports game. So there you go, loads of games. So actually, when it came to the end of it, I'd actually played a lot more games than I thought I had. So yeah, I did really enjoy it. And yeah, highlight for me, probably Panzer Dragoon and Nights into Dreams, despite my terrible playing of it. Oh, and let's not forget, of course, that I did also play Sonic R, which is... go and watch my Sonic video at the beginning of this month on my opinions on the Sonic games. But I think Sonic R is one of the worst, certainly one of the worst Sonic games I've ever played, if not one of the worst games I've played. It annoyed the hell out of me. Really, really not a great game. Played Sonic 3D Blast, which again it's okay. It's an okay game. It's a solid 5 or 6 out of 10. It works okay on the 16-bit Mega Drive, but there was just nothing new about it. There's nothing exciting about it. Of course, we didn't play Sega Extreme because it never even came out. And then what was the other one we played? There's the one with all the classic games in it as well, and I completely forgotten the name of it. But it was obviously the game that has the little sort of 3D world in the start, and then you basically got all the classic 2D Sonics that you can play as well. So had a bit of a go at those, but I didn't dwell too long on that, largely because you can play the 2D Sonics pretty much anywhere. They've been re-released so many times. It didn't make sense to spend time on the Saturn playing those. So there you go. Right, I've talked enough about the game. So loads of games, played a lot more than I remember playing. I have really enjoyed it. Some games in there that really aren't great, but some games in there that actually are really, really good. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, let's get on now and quickly talk about how you can get back into Sega Saturn gaming in 2026 in the next section. I'll see you there. Okay, so how do you get back into Sega Saturn gaming in 2026? So if you liked the look of the games and you think to yourself, do you know what, I'd like to get myself back into Sega Saturn gaming, well, I'm going to tell you how to do it. Basically, the long and short of it is there are not a lot of options. So when we've talked about other consoles before, you know, sometimes there's the mini version, sometimes there's better emulators, or you can play them on the Evercade or whatever it happens to be. So when we did the Intellivision, there's loads of options for playing in television. There's all sorts of places to play it. When you do Mega Drive or Genesis, there's loads of options for playing it. For Sega Saturn, you're a bit limited actually. So you've got, there are emulators, but generally speaking, your emulators are going to be pretty limited to mostly just playing on your PC or your Mac. The Saturn emulators on the Raspberry Pi, for instance, which I've got running behind me here, it's just a non-starter. Doesn't work very well. And so that is a bit of a struggle. You can play, so when I've done my recordings for the bit between, I've played on the emulator on my Mac. So I've got a M4 Mac, so quite an up-to-date Mac, and it does run the games pretty well. The issue that you'll have is playing on certain controllers, especially the ones that use the 3D controller. So Nights into Dreams, for instance, which use the 3D controller, doesn't seem to work very well with the PlayStation 4 controller. So that's a bit of a problem, but it is manageable. And of course, for the standard Saturn, you can use pretty much any controller. Certainly any modern controller will work fine with it. So you've got your emulator, so that is definitely one option, and it is pretty much your only option is on a PC or on a capable PC or Mac. Otherwise, you're just not going to get anywhere with that. The other option, of course, is to go and find yourself a Sega Saturn, and they're surprisingly easy to find. For a console that was quite rare, you will find them. You're going to pay upwards of £100, maybe more, for a good one. Obviously, this is the standard black one. There's 2 editions which you can pick up. There's also, you can find a different colour one. I think it's white, and you can get that as well. You can find them in most retailers. So if you go and hunt around, if you're in the UK, for instance, you can find them from CEX. A lot of independent places will stock them, but you'll generally only find 1 or 2. There's not loads and loads and loads around. So so that is basically your only option, but make sure that you are aware of, make sure you're just keeping aware of the fact that they've got a lot of moving parts, so the CD lasers can go in them. They do have, which is quite good, a little removable battery for the clock in the back, which is good, rather than it being on a capacitor that explodes inside. So, they seem to be fairly robust, but I think the issue that you'll have will be with the CD mechanism, and if you have a problem with that, it's quite hard to fix or replace. Of course, you can just take the guts of it out and mod it so that you can load games from an SD card, but I'll leave that down to your good capable selves to decide if that's something that you want to do. So quite limited options for getting back into Saturn. Generally speaking, I think the best option is probably to go and get yourself an actual Sega Saturn. But yeah, the emulators are good too as well. So if you've got the games, you don't want to boot up the console, or you don't own the console, obviously you can go and find the games online and then have a go in the emulator. So that's one option for you. But yeah, that's it. So pretty limited on that. So now let's go and have a talk about how I actually found living with the Sega Saturn for a month, and then let's wrap up the video and I will reveal to you what the next console is for March. I'll see you in there. Okay, so there we go then. So we've talked about the history, the hardware, some of the games, how you can get back into Sega Saturn in 2026. So what has it actually been like to live with in 2026? And should you go and check it out yourself? Well, it has been an interesting month. Now, I've always come into these months with episodes and months with an open mind about the console. It's, I went into it not thinking that, I liked Xboxes, and now I love Xboxes. So, I've had an open mind about it, and I think that's the whole point of the month is to live with a console that I don't really know or understand in some cases. Some of those consoles that I know and love very well, but a lot of the time it's consoles that I've never owned or played or forgotten about. And this was a real voyage of discovery for me, because I never knew anybody that owned a Sega Saturn. I never played on the Sega Saturn, and I didn't really know much about it other than that this was the place to play Sega Rally. That was about all I knew about it. So coming into this month it was a bit of an unknown. And to be honest with you, it's not been my favourite month. I have played some fantastic games on here, and it's not a bad console. It's not a bad console. It's not a great console. I think when you look at this generation and you look at the original PlayStation and the N64, this was in third place for good reason. It is the least accomplished. It suffered from its unfortunate history, the fact that it was rushed to market, the fact that it was difficult to build for, which meant the game selection was limited. And some of the games are amazing and fantastic, and they represent Sega at its absolute best. And some of it was really disappointing. Sonic's presence on the Sega Saturn was a real problem. And it's such a shame because, you know, I think a decent Sonic title on the Sega Saturn, maybe it would have saved the day. But you know what? I played a few games on there. Some of the games that I played that are also on the PlayStation version was either slightly better or pretty much the same. You know, if you were thinking about what console you were going to buy back in the day, then, you know, the PlayStation was £100 cheaper, $100 cheaper, and there was much more selection of games. So why wouldn't you? You know, you could play the same games. You could play Wipeout. You could play Die Hard. You could play those games on the PlayStation. The Die Hard version on the PlayStation was actually better. So why would you buy a Sega Saturn? So I have enjoyed this month, and I have played some amazing games. And let's not forget, of course, you know, Virtua Fighter, Sega Rally, Daytona, Nights into Dreams, Panzer Dragoon, all absolutely fantastic games. And Saturn exclusives as well. So if you wanted to play those games, this was the place to play it. And when you play those games, amazing, absolutely amazing. But everything else was pretty average. I didn't come away thinking I absolutely love this console. I didn't come away feeling completely converted, thinking the Sega Saturn's the best console I've ever played on, and it was totally misjudged. I think it gets a little bit of an unfair reputation, but only a little bit. I think some of it is well-founded, and it was created by that Sega chaos. It is a fascinating piece of history, and I've really enjoyed getting back into that side of it and understanding that in a little bit more depth to what I'd had done before, which has been great, and I've learnt a lot as I've gone along the way. But would I rush out and, you know, like if I saw maybe a Sega Saturn mini console come out or a whole bunch of new games for the Sega Saturn, am I going to go and spend my money on those things? Yeah, maybe not. Probably not. So there you go. So it's been enjoyable. It has not been my favourite month with, and that's not because it's bad. That's just because there's been ones that have been better. I think if at the time, I would always have gone for the PlayStation or possibly the N64 or those two. You know, I probably would have gone for one of those two or both of those two. The Sega Saturn I probably wouldn't have done, which is a real shame because I'm a huge Sega fan. But there you go. So that is it. That is the month with Sega Saturn. So I guess coming up next in the channel is the reveal of next month's console, and this is an absolute classic. This is a monster of a console. So let's have a bit of a drum roll for the March console, and the March console is going to be this bad boy, the Nintendo Entertainment System. I've been waiting to do this one for a while. What an important console this is. This is potentially responsible for saving the world of gaming from utter destruction after the big downturn in the early 1980s. Nintendo released the Famicom first in Japan, and then we got this little top-loading beauty here in the mid-80s, and it was a cultural phenomenon, I think, to say the least. And for the eagle-eyed of you behind me, you may have already figured it out because I've got Super Mario Brothers behind me. Probably one of the most famous, well-known games ever. It's still played extensively today, some 43-ish years later. You know, and that's incredible for a game to have lasted that long and just pretty much defined what 2D side-scrolling gaming like platforming should be. It pretty much set the scene. So, you know, things started pretty well for the NES, and yeah, I'm going to be looking at this. So I have memories of the NES, and I will obviously talk to you about that as the month goes on. But yeah, there we go. That is it, the Nintendo Entertainment System for next month. As I mentioned, there's probably less for me to talk about in the now and next now because there isn't so much coming on. I've got a couple of things coming in the post which I've pre-ordered for the Evercade, so I'm super excited about that. A couple of new cartridges, and yeah, the bit between is going to be a bit fewer and further between. So you know, I may do one or two, but you know, like I think Super Mario deserves an entire episode on its own, even if I just look at the first three of them, because that's an interesting story in itself, actually. So there you go. We'll have another race. So there's another racing challenge due pretty soon as well. So that's coming up. I can't remember what the game was. I can't remember. It's a rally game, I think. Oh, WRC. It's WRC Arcade. So we've got that to do. Me and Ollie will be doing that very soon. So keep an eye open for that. And then there may be a smattering of Monday minutes as we go through the month. But there you go. So that's it, I think. Thanks very much for joining me for all of this month and seeing me play some of these Sega Saturn games. If you haven't already had a look, go and check out my bit-betweens and where I play some of these games. But thanks for sticking with me through this video. I'm going to start wrapping up now because I've been talking forever and I'm not making any points anymore. So please do all take care of yourselves. Oh yes, of course, if you enjoy these videos, please do hit that like and subscribe button. Hit the bell icon as well to get notified of any other content that's up and coming. And yeah, please all take care of yourselves and I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye for now.